Why have we cultivated a culture in our community where education is devalued, undervalued, underfunded, right? And this whole pandemic, I think, has really kind of finally gotten people to understand that the work that we do as educators is really hard, and it's not babysitting.
Brandon here with the Solutionary Experiment. You just heard a little snippet of what is going to be happening this week. This conversation was so incredible. We actually had to extend it, break it up. There's a lot here for you guys to digest. So I don't want to give you all 90 plus minutes of things. So it's broken up into 3 different parts. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit that notification button. Get ready for part 1 of 3. Kick things on off. All right, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of having Dr. Ann Villa Villaraza. She's a tenured professor in Philippine Studies at the City College of San Francisco, where she's been teaching since 2014. She received her doctorate in history from Northern Illinois University in 2017 and specializes in Philippine history, U.S. immigration history, the history of race, ethnicity, and nationalism. Her primary research interests examine the use of cultural production, performing arts, theater, etc., as spaces to explore and negotiate ideas of belonging, nationalism, and identity. As a former K-12 teacher, she is also interested in the process of learning, the idea of transactional versus transformational education, and how the United States as a country has a contradictory relationship with our perception of the value of education. Lillian is teaching remotely this coming academic year, like many other college professors, and is concerned with the impact this will have on students and her colleagues, as well as the work of higher education as a whole in this new normal. I'll read a disclaimer so I don't get Dr. Lillian in trouble. All thoughts and opinions shared during this podcast are Dr. Villaraza's own and do not reflect any policy or process of the City College of San Francisco. Welcome.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, appreciate you being on. There's something in your bio that stood out to me like immediately. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the difference between transactional versus transformational education.
I knew that was going to go somewhere. So, So to begin with, I feel like education as a whole in this country has shifted from really emphasizing, okay, we're here to learn and we're here to cultivate lifelong learning in our citizens, which will really bolster this notion of responsible citizenship, right? And a space where we're supposed to be able to critique and have civic and civil conversations about hard issues, right? I would argue in the last 50 years, right, as there's been a call for the diversification of education and for the inclusion of other communities, it's been this move toward, okay, just get your degree, it doesn't matter, just learn the stuff you need to learn, and there's very little kind of work in terms of thinking about how does this chemistry class link to this sociology class and this this physical education class, and really kind of thinking about how the things that we're learning in school are all interconnected. It's just this, and I've had students who are just like, I just want to get an A, right? And I'm just like, okay, that's great. How are you going to do that? I'll just do the work. What do you mean by do the work? And they get really pissed off with me when I go down that rabbit hole of asking about their process. Because you can, as a historian, right? It's like, okay, I can tell you, here's the list of events that you need to know. Here's the chronology you need to know. Here are the people you need to know. And just leave it at that. That's transactional. And that's not cool with me. Transformational is, okay, this thing that happened in 1854, how does that connect to what you are doing right now and your life right now? And particularly because we've seen, the influx of immigration has shifted so completely since 1965. That relationship to a history prior to 65 is really kind of tense, I would say, because a lot of immigrant youth, right? And my parents were immigrants, right? And when I started my whole process, like, well, what does, you know, what do the founding fathers have to do with me? I came here in blah blah blah. I was born here,
Right.
but what's my connection? And it took me a long time to kind of think about, what is my relationship as a person of color, as an Asian American, as a Filipino American woman, to this national history of the United States and this nation as a political space. So so yeah, and that's the transformational part, right? My hope is that when I interact with students and I work with them, I tell them explicitly, I'm like, look, I know you're gonna forget 75% of the facts that
Right.
we are going to talk about. My question is, will you be able to take the stuff that you remember and extrapolate that and say, okay, wait a minute, this reminds me of dot dot dot. And wait a minute, why was that passed at that point and it's not now? Right? Why is that okay then but not now? And really have those dialogues. But you know, it really, it hurts my heart sometimes to think about how so many people are like, I just want to pass the class, and I have to be okay with that, you know, and that's fine, you know.
You know, I'm looking at what's going on right now, and you know, I mean, with the adults, and it seems like
Mhm.
people lack the ability to think critically.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, look, just give me just this little basic little information.
Mhm.
I'm not even gonna think about. Yeah, I mean, we're living in a society right now where people are getting their news from memes,
Yeah, I know.
which is
Mhm.
which is frightening. And so
Mhm.
I almost feel like I know that high school has failed
Mhm.
us because it definitely does not prepare
Mhm.
people to think critically. But it almost sounds like you're saying that even through college, sometimes that
Mhm.
they're not even being challenged
Mhm.
to do that.
Well, I don't know if it's that they're not. It's a whole system, right? I mean, we're talking about systemic change that needs to happen in the education system, right? And we have to look at the history of why this is in place, right? Why have we cultivated a culture
Mhm.
of in our community where education is devalued, undervalued, underfunded, right? And this whole pandemic, I think, has really kind of finally gotten people to understand that the work that we do as educators is really hard, and it's not babysitting, right? And I want to believe that most people didn't think that, right? But I also believe that people thought that it was easy, and I'm just like, oh, you've never wrangled a yard of 33 children who are in the middle of a dodgeball game because the bell just rang, you know? And then you have to calm them down and be like, okay, now we're doing silent reading. You're like, what? Silent reading? We just, endorphins. Like, shouldn't we do something else? You know? And so there's a whole system of it, right? I think about discussions about the prison pipeline, you know,
Mhm.
for underfunded, under-resourced communities. And I've seen that. I worked in Watson, I worked in Compton through Teach for America, and I saw it, you know, and part of it too is that who are the teachers who are going into those spaces and who are staying, who are committed, and are they being supported by the institution that they are serving, not just the communities, but because I found that the communities have always been super supportive, but the work of education in spaces that are underfunded and under resourced are so much more, they ask so much more of us who are educators. I used to run between my first 2 years of teaching, when I was
Mhm.
teaching third grade, not that I was bored and I didn't get paid, because a lot of teachers are on a 10-month pay scale. um, I hung out with my third graders turning fourth graders and had a book club every week, because a lot of them were just like, not only did they want something to do, but they're just like, well, I want to learn how to read better, right? And that
Love it.
was 1999 and 2000. And I actually just heard from, oh, it was maybe 2 years ago now, I heard from one of my very first students, and I cried
Oh my
because she was
goodness.
telling me, like, I'm doing this now, and I'm going for my master's, and I just wanted to tell
Wow.
you, your impact. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, okay, okay, you know. And her brother's in law school, and all of these things. Like the power that we have as educators is so precious and such a huge responsibility. And for it to be devalued on a national level is really disheartening. So
So let's talk public school, because I know you were a K through 12
yeah.
teacher. So I love having you on here because you can give so many different perspectives and points of view.
Hmm.
Um, so you said you taught third
Hmm.
grade? Okay.
Yes, yes.
How many years did you do that?
I taught third grade for 3 years, and then a 2-3 split my last year when I was in the classroom, which was 2001. And then I was also in the middle of all of that. I was a literacy remediation specialist for a small literacy clinic in West Los Angeles. And what I found really fascinating about that was, I'd spend from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Compton, in,
Yeah.
in Linwood, right? And then
Yeah.
I'd go to West LA and I'd be there. And, the stark kind
Those are
of
two different worlds.
disparities, mm-hmm, class, race, like need. And it's what was fascinating to me is that the work that I was doing is so much needed in these, again, underrepresented, under-resourced spaces,
Hmm.
right? But that's where the resources were, right? I had this one student, she was 19, and remember, this was in the early 2000s, and I still
Right.
remember this stuff, right? So she was 19, graduating, recognized she was basically illiterate, and fought the district to, and I'm not disclosing which district, but um, one, for them to pay for her use of those resources at this clinic that I worked at. And she was phenomenal. Oh my God. She was absolutely phenomenal. And she got to grade level within months. And she was in 12th grade, and I can only imagine how much more she would have thrived if she had those supports from the beginning. So when I look at my students at City College, I ask those same questions, right? It's like, what supports did you not receive? What supports
Hmm.
do you feel like you could have, you know, would have helped you to be not a better student, but a more thoughtful learner? Because student and learner, again, are two different things. Student feels very finite, right? Learner, you're in it. You're in to win it. So, I I really kind of think about the students who have been left behind by a system that has basically said, you know, fend for yourself. Um, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me, but I do feel like we need to do better. We need to do so much better by everybody who is in this system that is in it to support the future of our country and to make it better. Because right now, look who we got as leaders. I'm
So let,
saying.
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You're you are now Dr. Betsy DeVos.
Oh, Jesus.
All right.
Yes, please. Is she
And
a doctor? Oh, dear God.
yes,
Sorry.
and Donald J. Trump has said, "All right, I am completely in alignment with you. I want to completely overhaul the education system, and I want to do better. I want our country to do better."
Oh, Lord.
Where do you start? Where do you think, if you were in that seat, where would you start? What would you do?
First, I'd make him take a history class. I'd make him take a history class. And then I'd make him take ethnic studies. And then we'd
Oh
have a
boy.
conversation. So I'm just like, dude, really? Sorry. And you can,
No,
because
it's all good.
I feel like there is so much that he does not know. So much that he does not, and it's frustrating to me because as a leader, this is what is projected to our population, but also to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And our population, right, for folks who are listening to him, they think it's completely fine. And I'm like, no, this is how we got here. Like, we need informed, intelligent, critical people in positions of leadership. But if I were the Secretary of Education,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I were the Secretary of Education, first I would say this is the long game. And, 4 years is not enough to build or rebuild or change a system that has worked against so many communities, right? And not just community color, right? Communities that have been impoverished, communities that have been redlined, communities that have been, marginalized in so many different ways, right? Rural versus urban, right? And so reservations versus the US, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, long range, I would say, okay, first let's do a study.
Mm-hmm.
Let's engage the people who are actually doing the work on the ground, right? I think there are a lot of people who go and get their educational doctorates in leadership and administration, and now they have these super cush jobs being administrators in
Mm-hmm.
colleges, universities, districts, et cetera, et cetera. And really, it's the money. It's ridiculous how much money so many of these administrators make. And I get it. It's like, okay, you're in charge of like shepherding the institution forward, right? But if you think of all the scandals, you think about all the money lost, you think about the lack of accountability, it's kind of like, did you really, I don't know, did you earn that? And that's, so yeah, I mean, so long range study. And then I would say, to the communities that have been the most under resourced, that are in the most
Mm-hmm.
need, what do you need? What do you need? Right? Um, and the reality is that we have to think about this broader than education, right? The actual kind of space of education. We have to tell people, it's like, this is what your property taxes pay for, and this is why you're paying property taxes, right? If you remember the 1980s, Prop 13 decimated public education in California, right? Because people are like, no, we don't want to pay taxes. Guess what? That's what was funding our schools, right?
Yeah.
And there's the move now to excuse me, to have that reinvested back into the California state system. But as a whole, I'm sitting here going, so if we're calling for lower taxes but not understanding the impact of that, that is problematic. So as education wise, it's like, okay, you're proposing a tax bill. Let's tell the public what this is going to mean in terms of education, right? Because every single policy that is put out there
Mm-hmm.
impacts education, right? Let's talk about how much the military gets and why that is, and why some of the most robust ROTC programs are in communities of color, under resourced spaces,
Wow.
marginalized communities. Like, let's look at ROTC and why is that, right? And I came out of a military family. My dad was in the Navy. So I
Mm-hmm.
get it. I saw my peers go into ROTC because it was a way into a career, into education, etc. But I'm also sitting there going, okay, but can we think about what that also means to you, to your body, to your mental health, to your community,
So you think that's by
to
design?
systemic changes needed. I mean, I mean, I would be very interested to see it. What do the ROTC programs look like in very highly resourced communities? Are they recruiting people from those spaces, right? Are the school districts allowing them to be in those spaces, right? And if they are or are not, where is the dissent coming from? Is it the parents? Is it, and so is it the district? Is it the teachers? Is it the students? I mean, there's agency that comes with power. And my big thing has always been trying to figure out how to help my students particularly see their power, So,
One of the things that you'd mentioned was redlining. And I don't think that the average American really understands how powerful that was and
oh my
how we're
God.
still dealing with the impact of that right now.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. And
I,
again,
I almost feel like if there was some way to kind of reverse and fix some of that, I think that would be almost the beginning.
hmm
At least in terms of how, you know, the public education system is
hmm
funded. Because,
hmm
like, say for instance, where I'm at
hmm
in Austin,
hmm
East Austin is considered the hood, although that's being gentrified, and don't even get me
yeah.
started with that.
Because that's when the value goes up, and then the people who the right people. Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
But then what I see what's happening over on the west side of
Hmm.
town is, that's people who typically don't look like me. They have a lot of money. But
Hmm.
I'm reading a book right now. I don't know if you've read it
Hmm.
before,
Hmm.
called The Color of Law.
I want to read that. A bunch of my students were reading that for one of their classes, and I was just like, I need to read this. And what was fascinating is that all of them were like, I did not know this, and they
It's
were
mind blowing.
angry. Yeah,
It's
and I'm
mind
like, I
blowing.
need to read
And the thing
this.
is the
Hmm.
author spends a lot of time talking about Daly City,
Hmm.
Milpitas,
Hmm.
Richmond, Oakland. I mean, he spends a lot of time. And I think the purpose of it is he wants people to understand that, look, even in the most liberal state in our
Hmm.
union,
Yes.
this is the sort of behavior that happens. So basically his
Hmm.
argument is, if it happened in California, it
Hmm.
happened everywhere.
Yes.
And it did, and he gives a lot of resources. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
anyway, I'll
Yeah.
link his
Yeah.
his book, but it's a fantastic
Yes.
book.
Yes. Everybody should read it. Like seriously, everyone should read it. Go on.
So
Sorry.
for so for me,
Hmm.
what I see going on, and correct me, because you know more, you've forgotten more about how the education system works than I know. But what I see is a situation where the property taxes from these affluent areas are
Hmm.
funding these schools. The
Hmm.
schools over in my part of the town, over on the
Hmm.
west side,
Hmm.
those schools, those public schools, are like these high-end charter or private schools or
Oh.
anywhere else. I mean, these schools have a
Hmm.
ridiculous amount of money. You don't have
Hmm.
to send your students to anything else. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there'd just be complete and utter outrage if we said, all right, look, we're going to reallocate this funding for the whole entire city and make it kind of even
Oh,
across the board.
no, that would never happen. Because it's like, wait, I pay my property taxes for where I live. Why do I need to pay for what's going on over there? That's not. And this, you can root this back, right, to the fundamental American ideology of individualism. Well,
Mhm.
they're over there. Why should I pay for their stuff, right? And
To me, though,
I
if we
just.
don't, to me, if we're it's just like like a football team or
Mhm.
any other sports team. You're
Mhm.
only as good as those weakest links. If you don't
Oh
do
yeah.
something to help uplift
Mhm.
other folks and
Mhm.
try and even the playing field. And I think for me, I think education is a great equalizer. Even
Mhm.
though I've me, I've got my thoughts on
Mhm.
higher education and
Yeah.
costs, and we'll get into
Is
that
it an
probably a little
equalizer?
bit later.
Yeah, like, is it an equalizer? Sorry.
I know there's studies that actually refute exactly what it is I'm saying,
Mhm.
because I've
Mhm.
seen the studies that says, look, if you have a person of color
Mhm.
who has this degree
Mhm.
and has done all these different things, this
Mhm.
GPA and
Mhm.
whatnot, and then you
Mhm.
have someone who is, a white male who's
Mhm.
done all the same things,
Mhm.
that if you follow their trajectory and whatnot, it's the facts of the matter are is
It's
that,
different.
yeah, it is going to be a different path. So I'll
Right.
retract that.
Right.
I do think it helps narrow that gap a little bit.
Yes, it's supposed to be. That is the thought, right? That in a utopian society, and what the United States is supposed to be, right? Yes, education is supposed to be this great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
But when we start from a point where education is not equal, then that's not going to happen, right? And so I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to talk a little bit about desegregation and busing and things like that, and from my own experience, right? So, and I think this is very kind of exemplary of what we're talking about. So when there's, and you probably know about this, there is a program in California called the Gifted Program, like Gifted and Talented Education, right? So I went to a school that was in my neighborhood until second grade, predominantly working class, Southeast San Diego. My school is predominantly Filipino and Black and Latino, right? And I was tested and found that I was gifted.
Okay.
That put me on a path to be bused starting at 5 a.m. to a school in a predominantly white neighborhood in another part of the town, right? Through something called the Voluntary Ethnic Enrollment Program, or VEEP, right? So there's
what year are we talking?
We're talking the 80s. We're talking the 80s, right? And so when I think about, okay, my parents were, immigrants, and they're like, oh my God, this is a great opportunity you're gonna have. I was doing stop motion animation in 6th grade. I was developing black and white photography. We had a dark room in our classroom, right? Like when I look back at what my formative educational experience was, that is where I learned to be a learner, not just a student, and to be inquisitive and fascinated by all these different things, right? And I had wonderful teachers, I did, but it didn't dawn on me until 7th grade to say, why is this not in my neighborhood? Why don't the folks in my neighborhood have these opportunities? Because when I go home, I don't have friends to play with, who I'm gonna hang out with in my neighborhood, because we don't share the same scholastic, kind of like, oh, do you have, Miss So-and-so as your 2nd grade teacher? Oh man, yeah, she Black. Yeah. It's like, you can't have those conversations. And it didn't dawn on me until middle school, right? And so I think about when we talk about equity, you're absolutely right. We need to think about reappropriating and redistributing tax dollars. But I can guarantee you that people in more wealthy neighborhoods are going to say, well, that's not my problem. They need to take care of that. Well, it's not my fault they can't live where I live. But if you're putting notes on their door that say you don't belong there, there's something that happened in Los Altos like yesterday, the day before. But it's
say what? Hold on. In 2020, that's still going on?
Oh yeah, there was some woman in LA who was going around like putting notes on people's doors. You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from. Blah 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 blah. This is a couple months ago, and just a couple of days ago, this happened again. Different woman, right? Different person. And I'm just like, yes, and I find it fascinating that we say, well, it's 2020, it's 21st century, da, 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 da. But that speaks to the fact that we have not learned. We have not gotten past the biases, and we have not addressed those things that keep us in fear of each other, that could potentially support the development of a more equitable society, right? It's absolutely fascinating to me.
So what people will say is they will say, well, Dr. Lillian, why don't, the parents of other, children do what your parents did? Really get you to, apply, focus on your studies and whatnot. That's in the cards for everyone. What say you?
Is it? Okay, so, I'm Filipino, I'm Asian American, and the Asian American population has, since the 80s, for some Asian American communities, have been propped up as this model minority, right? And so it's like, yeah, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and which, kind of works with the whole American idea of individualism and doing things on your own and your own success, not anybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
My parents didn't know how to apply for financial aid. They didn't know how to navigate that system. If you talk to my husband, right, he didn't know about any of that stuff. Nobody in our high schools. Like, I was fortunate. My English teacher was also my counselor. So he was like, make sure that you do this and this and this. But again, I had a very blessed education. Like, I know that. Like, I was blessed with what I was able to do. And that's why I am where I am now, right? And like, it's not the same, an application. It's like, so I think about my students who are like, yeah, I'd love to finish the class, but I'm living in my car right now.
Wow.
I'm really having a hard time processing this emotionally and mentally, right? Like, COVID, it blew open the doors in terms of thinking about inequity in education and how we are addressing the issues that our students are facing. And so, working in a community college, I'm not dealing with the youth who have access to computers, have a stable home, and granted, there's a big percentage of California State University system students who are actually homeless, right? But at the community college level, I have students who are struggling every single day, trying to figure out how to navigate this pretty much on their own. And one of the first things I have to tell them is, you're not alone. What can we do to help? What do we need to do to help? What are the services that we need to get you plugged into, right? With the caveat of, I can help you, but I can't bring you there and be like, do this. It's up to you, right? But I will do my best to support you in that process. And so there, it's hard, right? It's not an equitable space. It's not they were supposed to give our students computers who did not have computers at home, right?
Okay.
And I saw, when we went into shutdown, I saw a bunch of my colleagues who worked at different institutions. They're like, oh yeah, we sent out our computers, the first week out, right? So by the end of March, their students were at least set up with a computer to do remote learning. I had students who were telling me by, the finals week, they're like, I'm still waiting. And I don't know what to say to that. I don't know if that was the institution, or if that was, other systems, because there were other systems involved getting our students the tech that they needed. But we need to do better. We just need to do better.